They say the little things don't break you. It's the accumulation. For me, it wasn't betrayal or cruelty that pushed me to the edge. It was dishes. Rotting, stinking, fungus-covered dishes. I'm 25, a nurse who works 12-hour shifts at a city hospital. My life is loud enough at work. Monitors beeping, call lights flashing, people crying, people healing. When I come home, I crave silence. Clean surfaces. Peace. When I first met Maya, my 26-year-old soon-to-be roommate, she seemed perfect for that peace. She was funny, upbeat, a little messy but charmingly so. "I'm not Martha Stewart," she joked on move-in day, balancing a box labeled kitchen chaos. I left then. I didn't know that label would become a prophecy. The first few weeks were fine. We shared groceries, took turns cooking, even watched bad reality shows together. But then slowly the sink started to fill. A mug here, a bowl there. I'd wash my own things, rinse hers too, and tell myself it wasn't a big deal. Everyone gets tired. Everyone slips up. But soon it wasn't just a slip-up. It was a lifestyle. Plates with crusted sauce, pans glued with burnt rice, cups growing a fuzzy green ring of mold. Sometimes I'd wake up for my early shift and find last night's dinner still sitting in the sink, untouched. I'd sigh, roll up my sleeves, and wash them because I couldn't stand the smell of decay while making coffee. Maya would stumble out of her room around noon, yawning. "Thanks, girl, I was gonna get to that later." Later never came. At first, I tried politeness. "Hey, can you please handle your dishes today? They're kind of piling up." "Sure thing," she'd chirp. Then notes. "Please wash dishes before end of day." Then reminders that sounded more like prayers. We agreed to clean up daily, remember? It didn't matter. By the next week, the same gray water would sit in the sink like swamp sludge. Fruit flies gathered like tiny witnesses to my frustration. I remember one night coming home so drained that my fingers trembled from carrying my bag. I just wanted to pour cereal, eat, and sleep. Instead, the sink was overflowing, towers of filth leaning like monuments to disrespect. You can only be understanding for so long before it starts to rot inside you too. Kindness turns sour when it isn't reciprocated. I confronted her again, trying to sound calm. "Maya, this isn't working. You have to do your dishes." She didn't even look up from her phone. I said I will. "Stop nagging." That word, nagging, hit me like a slap. I pay half the rent. I work full-time. I clean up after you. And I'm the nag? I wanted to scream, but exhaustion silenced me. I went to my room, shut the door, and stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep angry. A few days later, things got worse. I came home after another double shift, 12 hours of rushing between rooms, watching monitors, trying to keep patients alive. The kind of day that empties you completely. I opened the apartment door and the smell hit me like a physical wall. Rotting food. Sour water. Garbage that hadn't been taken out. The sink wasn't just full. It was overflowing. Dirty dishes balanced on top of other dirty dishes, like a tower of pure disrespect. My stomach turned. I dropped my bag on the floor and just stood there, shaking. I texted her. "Maya, this is disgusting. Please clean your dishes tonight." A few seconds later. "I'll do it when I can. Stop nagging." That was it. The line. The moment patience died and justice was born. I looked at the sink again. The slimy water. The plates glued with dried cheese. A fork sticking out like a middle finger. And something inside me snapped. Quietly but completely. I wasn't even furious. I was done. Done being polite. Done being ignored. Done being the maid. It started as a joke in my mind. What if I just dumped all this garbage on her bed? But the more I looked at it, the more it made sense. She treated the kitchen like her personal trash bin. Why not return the favor? She didn't respect shared space. Maybe she'd understand when her space wasn't safe from her own mess. The idea settled into me like calm. Not rage, just clarity. I rolled up my sleeves, tied my hair, and started pulling dishes out of the sink one by one. The plates stuck together with congealed sauce, the pans slimy and foul. The smell made me gag, but I didn't stop. I stacked them carefully on a towel, not to break them. I wasn't destroying her property, just relocating it. Her mess, her bed. Fair trade. Her door was unlocked. The room was dim, smelling faintly of cheap perfume and stale snacks. I walked in with the first load, balancing plates like toxic treasures. I set them down gently on the bedspread, one after another. Cups, bowls, utensils, then the pots. I could feel my hands trembling, not from anger but from the surreal satisfaction of doing something I'd only imagined. Then came the grand finale, the gray dishwater. I picked up the basin, sloshing with bits of food, and walked back into her room. One last look at her soft pink pillow, and I poured it out. The water soaked in instantly, leaving stains that looked like a battlefield. Her bed looked like her conscience, filthy and undeniable. I stood there in silence, the faint drip of water hitting the carpet the only sound. Then I laughed. Not a cruel laugh, more like the first laugh after months of holding my breath. For the first time in a year, the kitchen sink was empty. For the first time in a year, I felt free. The moment I finished, the apartment felt eerily still. No TV, no music. Not even the hum of the refrigerator could fill the silence that followed what I'd just done. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence before thunder. I took a shower, scrubbing until the smell of dishwater faded from my hands. Then I sat on the couch, hair damp, heart hammering in my chest. Half of me wanted to laugh. The other half wanted to cry. Around midnight, I heard keys jangling at the door. Her laugh came first, loud, carefree, completely unaware. Then the click of her boots across the tile. "Maya's home," she called, as if announcing herself to a crowd. The moment she stepped into her room, there was a sharp, guttural scream. What is this?" I froze, then slowly stood up. She burst out of her room holding a dripping pillow, the water still sliding off its edges. "You psycho," she shrieked. "What did you do to my bed? Are you out of your mind?" Her voice cracked somewhere between shock and disgust. I looked her in the eye and said, steady and low, "You said you'd clean it when you could. I thought I'd help you understand what it feels like to live with filth." She gaped at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "That's not the same thing. You ruined my stuff. This is insane." "Is it?" I said quietly. "Because that's exactly what our kitchen looks like. Every day. The difference is I can't escape that." She blinked, shaking her head. "You could have just talked to me." "I did, Maya. 4 months." There was a pause. A thin thread of silence stretched between us. She dropped the pillow onto the floor with a wet thud and stormed toward the kitchen. When she saw the empty sink, she laughed bitterly. "Well, congratulations," she spat. "You cleaned the sink." And then she slammed the front door and left. I stood there in the echo of the slam, staring at the wet floor where her pillow had landed. The rational part of me whispered that I'd gone too far. The exhausted part of me said I'd finally done what needed to be done. I cleaned up the drips, threw the towel in the laundry, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboard felt like guilt walking around my room. At 3 a.m, I texted her. "I shouldn't have done that. But you should have listened before it came to this." No reply. When I woke up, she was gone. Her room smelled faintly of detergent. She must have tried to wash the bedding, but mold and dishwater don't forgive easily. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from my mug. What now? Would she move out? Would the landlord get involved? Would this turn into one of those stories where 2 people go to court over a sink? Then came the text. "Breakfast? 10 a.m. at the cafe." I'm not promising to be nice. I exhaled, relief mixed with anxiety. At the cafe, she looked tired. No makeup, hair in a bun, dark circles under her eyes. Neither of us spoke until the coffee arrived. Finally, she sighed. "I wanted to kill you last night." I smiled faintly. "I figured. I mean, who does that?" she said, half laughing now. I walked into my room and it smelled like death. "And yet, I kinda get why you did it." That caught me off guard. She stirred her coffee slowly. "I've been going through some stuff. My mom's been sick, my hours got cut, and honestly, I've been depressed. I know that's not an excuse, but cleaning felt pointless. The dishes were just another reminder that I'm failing." Her voice trembled a little. And there it was, the humanity behind the mess. I felt my chest loosen. The anger that had driven me for weeks quietly evaporated. "I'm sorry," I said. "I shouldn't have touched your things." I snapped. "I'll buy you a new bed." She looked up, surprised. "You don't have to." "I do," I said. That was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. She nodded slowly. "I get it. I pushed you there." I guess we both sucked at being adults. We sat in silence, two people realizing how close they'd come to ruining their lives over dirty dishes. When we got home, the apartment felt different. The air wasn't heavy anymore. She gathered her bedding and took it to the trash. I helped mop the floor. Neither of us spoke much, but the act itself, cleaning together, said what words couldn't. That night, for the first time in months, the sink stayed empty. She even taped a note to the wall above it. "If you dirty it, you clean it immediately." I laughed when I saw it. Progress, I guess. Over the next few weeks, things actually improved. Maya washed her dishes daily, took out the trash, even cleaned the bathroom once without being asked. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and I could see it. Sometimes we joked about the incident. She'd say, "Careful, or she'll redecorate your room with leftovers." I roll my eyes. "You're lucky I didn't use the blender." It became our dark little joke, a weird badge of survival. But deep down, something had shifted. I learned how far exhaustion could push a person, and she'd learned how far neglect could push someone else. We never went back to being best friends. We didn't need to. We became something quieter, two flawed people who'd crossed a line and then built a fence around it so it would never happen again. I replaced her mattress and bedding as promised. She started paying more attention to her space. There was no grand reconciliation, no movie-style hug with sad piano music. Just respect, the kind that's forged out of chaos. Every time I walk past the kitchen now and see a clean sink, I remember the night I filled her bed with dishes and the silence that followed. Because sometimes, it takes one absurd act to reset the balance. I didn't expect peace to feel so unfamiliar. It's strange. When you live in chaos long enough, silence almost sounds suspicious. For days after the incident, I'd come home and brace myself for the smell of rot, for the sight of an overflowing sink, but it never came. Every time I walked into that spotless kitchen, I felt two things at once: guilt and relief. Guilt for what I'd done. Relief for what I'd finally stopped tolerating. The apartment began to breathe again. The air no longer carried that faint odor of spoiled food. It smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. The counters gleamed. The light from the window no longer fell on crusted plates, but on clean dishes drying neatly by the rack. I'd wake up early before work, sip coffee, and realize the simple joy of peace. No shouting. No mess. No silent resentment waiting behind a closed door. It felt like my home again, not a battlefield. And though Maya and I weren't suddenly best friends, we'd found a rhythm. She'd cook, I'd set the table. I'd mop, she'd take out the trash. For the first time we functioned. One night, after another long shift, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and caught sight of myself. Dark circles, tired eyes, but something else too: softness. I realized how much anger had shaped me those past months. I'd been so consumed by frustration that I'd stopped being kind, not just to her, but to myself. I'd convinced myself that exploding was the only way to be heard. And maybe it was in that moment. But I also saw the cost of that explosion. The shock, the tears, the burnt bridge we'd barely managed to rebuild. So I whispered to my reflection, never let it get that far again. It surprised me how genuine Maya's effort became. She started cleaning without reminders, sometimes even leaving the sink sparkling before heading to work. One evening, she knocked on my door holding a small box. Inside was a new dish rack, chrome, shiny, brand new. "I figured we could start fresh," she said, awkward smile on her face. It wasn't an apology wrapped in words. It was one wrapped in action. I smiled back. "Thanks. It looks perfect." She nodded. "I still can't believe I slept on moldy macaroni for one night." "That's trauma." We both laughed, that kind of shared, weary laughter that only people who've seen the worst version of each other can manage. My therapist listened to the whole story like it was a dark comedy. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, You know, people talk about 50 ways to leave your lover. You might have invented the first way to reform a roommate. I laughed, but she wasn't done. What you did wasn't healthy, but it was honest. Sometimes, when words stop working, people resort to symbolism. You just used very dirty symbolism. She was right. I hadn't just dumped dishes on a bed. I dumped months of exhaustion, disappointment, and invisible labor. Every cup, every crusted plate, every fork was a piece of respect I hadn't been given. And when you're tired enough, you'll demand respect in whatever language gets heard. Weeks turned into months. Life settled. We paid bills on time, cooked dinners together occasionally, even joked about our next potential roommates. Maybe next time we screen for cleanliness first, she'd tease. There were still moments of tension. Two adults learning to coexist never happens without friction, but there was also understanding now. One rainy night, we were sitting on the couch watching an old movie when she said quietly, "Thanks for not giving up on me." I looked at her. "Thanks for not calling the cops." We both burst out laughing. But behind the laughter was truth. Forgiveness doesn't need grand gestures. Sometimes, it's shared popcorn on a couch that used to be a war zone. Looking back, I realized this story was never really about dishes. It was about boundaries, the invisible lines we draw to protect our peace, and how messy it gets when those lines are crossed. It was about the cost of silence, how every time you swallow anger, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates, until one day it spills out in the most absurd, unforgettable way. And it was about empathy. Because after everything, what healed us wasn't punishment. It was conversation. It was understanding the pain behind the behavior. People online would probably call what I did revenge. Maybe it was, in a way, poetic, impulsive, and way too dramatic. But to me, it became something else, a reset button. Revenge feels good for a second. But what feels better, infinitely better, is reclaiming your space, your sanity, and your sense of self. If I'd kept bottling up my anger, I'd still be living in resentment. But that one act, messy, wrong, yet undeniably cathartic, broke the cycle. And sometimes, that's what justice really is. It's been almost a year now. Maya and I eventually went our separate ways when our lease ended. We hugged goodbye, promised to stay in touch, and actually meant it. Her last text to me was simple. "You taught me that cleanliness isn't just about dishes. It's about respect." And my reply was, "You taught me that anger doesn't have to destroy. It can rebuild too." Now I live alone. The sink is clean, the air is light, and when I come home after a long shift, I breathe without fear of the smell of decay. Sometimes, I still laugh remembering that night, standing there, dripping dishwater on her carpet, feeling both insane and free. Because in that ridiculous, chaotic act, I didn't just throw dishes. I threw away months of exhaustion, years of silence, and a version of myself that always put peace above self-respect. You don't always get to choose your battles, but you do get to choose when to stop fighting quietly. Sometimes, self-respect doesn't arrive in calm words. It arrives in chaos, followed by clarity. And as strange as it sounds, sometimes a clean sink can mean you finally cleaned up your life. If this story reminded you that boundaries matter more than politeness, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the most outrageous way you've ever stood up for yourself? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where ordinary people find extraordinary ways to reclaim their peace.